Welcome, welcome. Welcome to our hot topics for April 17th, I guess it is, 2024. And I think we've got some fun and exciting topics to connect around, things that are really happening and things keep really happening as we move along. Okay. Got some people still connecting to audio, so we'll give it a few moments. I do appreciate everyone being here. If at any time any of you have difficulties in connecting, registering, anything like that, please shoot me an email because, what I'll just say is that for those of you who use me actively on the interactive process meeting, we had some scheduling platform glitches, not my stuff, but the scheduling platform we used that they were doing changes and it disrupted a whole bunch of our stuff. But I think we've got it all worked out. But if you have ever any difficulties in scheduling on that thing or scheduling for our podcast, please just let me know. I do want to just acknowledge to everyone too. I've been sort of dealing with a respiratory cold situation. How appropriate. Oh, allergies and respiratory conditions impacting the workplace. I guess we'll talk about that. I don't know that mine's necessarily that, but anyway, my voice is a little bit challenged, so I'll put myself on mute if I feel the need to cough, but appreciate all of you being here. And of course, we have Felicia Menta, our JPA program manager from the County Office of Education. And so appreciate her insights, her expertise and experience in helping us widen our knowledge about medical conditions in the workplace, because the world keeps expanding on that whole notion, doesn't it, Felicia?
Yes, it does.
Yes. Okay. I wanted to give a minute or two, and we're at 1:05 now, so we'll go ahead and get started. We may have additional people joining us based on the registrations. Just as a reminder, this is being recorded, and so the recording will be released to all the participants who registered, within a few days, and we try to include any resources, links, and things like that as well. That we do encourage you to share, pass it on. Share with perhaps your bosses, your coworkers, people who need to know, because these are interesting topics and interesting challenges that we all face, and that's why we do it. Come together and share ideas and share experiences. And is there ever a final answer? Not really. There's just usually best practices based on what we know, because it keeps changing. Okay, so we I think have 4 pretty exciting topics today. Would you agree, Felicia?
Oh, yeah, very interesting.
Yes. So I have a few cases going on and have over this last year about workplace environment. So that's our first topic, is your workplace making you sick? And then secondly, and we all experience this, what do we do when doctors disagree? Who's right and who's wrong? And it even touched on to the whole topic about malpractice. And no definitive answers, but we do have some thoughts. And then service dogs. I imagine many of you may have either encountered a request for a service dog or a support dog, and or maybe if you travel, you've seen all kinds of animals show up on airplanes. It's been quite a dynamic picture when it comes to support animals, service dogs, and so forth. And again, I've had a few situations around that, done a lot of research, feel pretty up to date on where it is. And again, as with any medical accommodation, it's on a case-by-case basis. So we'll talk about that. And then our last topic, my way or the highway. Is that a reflection of perhaps your district's thinking process, or are we truly coming together to think outside the box? And I know, Felicia, for you and I, we both have said, I need to know some facts, but I don't really have any preconceived notions about the outcomes. Would you agree?
Yes.
Yeah. We may have some ideas about where we think it might go, but again, that's sort of the beauty about the interactive process, is information unfolds and we make better and more informed decisions. So let's get started, Felicia. And again, number 1, is your workplace making you sick? And so, we all know about COVID. My goodness, we all lived with it. And yet, there's a few things, as our world becomes more, what do I want to say, manufactured, and including food and buildings and so forth, we see more additives. being brought into our workplaces and our food products and so forth. And so that's been an evolving measure.
Mhm.
But then too, we are seeing increased sensitivities as a result of COVID, whether or not it's long-term COVID, but I know myself, I've had COVID twice, and I know I'm a little bit more sensitive these days than not. But I had some pre-existing allergies too. So, so Felicia, what has been your experience? And I'll share some of my experience so our participants can learn from this.
We've had some really interesting work comp claims, I have to say, on is your building making you sick? And they sort of run a different field. So I had like 3, so I don't know how much we'll have time for, but I thought I'd go ahead and give some of the ones we had. We had a building that was under construction at a large district that was being remodeled. And this was student services, the area where student services was. The building remodel was finished. Everybody came into the beautiful new space, and immediately, and I mean 5 people, plus the supervisor, started complaining about a smell. Well, M&O went over there. I went over there. A lot of people went over there, couldn't smell it, right? Just now, again, we're just going in and going out. These people sit there 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week. And they kept saying that they were complaining. Symptoms ranged from headaches to nosebleed to rashes to allergic type symptoms, to your point, respiratory difficulty breathing. What ended up happening is we gave all 5 of them a claim form. The district did. All 5 of them filed work comp claims. And we sent all 5 of them over to Sharpry-Steely to be evaluated, right? Because those claims are usually investigated because they need a little bit more information, because headaches and nosebleeds and respiratory illnesses are caused by lots of different things, right? M&O started investigating. And again, this is a brand new remodel, and trying to figure out where's the smell, what's the smell. In the meantime, this was causing a lot of drama over in this department. So what HR decided to do was, even without a note, they temporarily removed not everyone in the building, because not everyone in the building was complaining. These 5 said that it was emanating from an area and an HVAC system around the bathroom, and they moved them temporarily into another building and just took them out of the work environment while they were working on this. M&O worked on it, and then loss control, JPA loss control came over, did some indoor air quality studies, and then they felt like more needed to be done, and they hired out an indoor air quality expert, and he came in and did a study as well. The 5 that went over to Sharpry-Steely all got evaluated, and at the time, Dr. Monday, who is a toxicologist and a specialist in this area, but Ahmed can see these things too, said, I don't think that all of your symptoms that all of you are having, I don't think necessarily rise to the level of an occupational injury or disease. And the claims were not accepted on the comp side. That's what's happening on the comp side. Yeah. So it's kind of an interesting claim. In the meantime, and the indoor air quality report did go over to Dr. Monday to review also at Sharpry-Steely. And what he ended up saying was that the airflow, the in and out airflow, needed to be looked at. He didn't feel that the headaches, he said, all of you do have allergies and headaches, but they're not related to this. He felt like, and this was, I'm not aware of their discussion, but what I think may have happened is there's a pre-existing history of these things. And so all the things that they said were because of the smell. So what then happened was M&O went over and worked on the airflow and took Dr. Monday's recommendations and replaced some air filters and worked on the HVAC system. And all 5 were successfully moved back into the building, and all were happy after that. But it really created a lot of drama in this department. And so that in that case, the comp claim was not accepted. In this other case that I have is also a very interesting case. Comp claim was accepted. The other example that I had, which was an office clerk receptionist in a pretty busy front district office area where everybody's coming in, filed a work comp claim alleging she was allergic to toner. toner that's in copy machines. And now this was per her, right? So she wanted a claim form, filed a claim, and went to an ACMED doctor. And the ACMED doctor did feel that her allergy to this toner was work related. And then he put her on modified duty with a temporary, in the beginning, a temporary accommodation of no working at or around copy machines or other machines that have toner in them. And then the district really bent over backwards. They moved her to one area that was over by the bathroom, but then she said that the smells in the bathroom were making her sick. Then they moved her to another area, but that it was over by the kitchen. And so we have somebody who's sensitive, right, to smells. That's what we know, what we learned through this experience. They moved her over by the kitchen area, but it's where people go in and kind of heat up and eat their lunch. And then those smells were coming over, wafting over and making her sick. They moved her at least 5 or 6 times, trying to accommodate these work restrictions, but it was really difficult. And she did have allergy testing done, which is difficult to find somebody who will do that in work comp. It is really difficult. We do have some people, but it's very difficult. It's not something that is done a lot on the work comp side, right? It's done a lot on the group health side. So it's a little, and the allergy testing revealed she was allergic to all kinds of things, right? Very sensitive to all kinds of stuff. Eventually, the doctor had her working with a HEPA filter, if you can imagine, on working at the front desk, greeting parents and people in business meetings coming in with her HEPA filter on. And it just really became difficult. And finally, the work restrictions rose to the level where, you know what happened? They were not able to accommodate. And she ended up leaving, using the rest of her leave and going on early retirement. And that claim was accepted as being related. They did try to use photocopiers that don't have toner. They did a lot to try and work with her. But these cases are really difficult, really are.
Yep, they are. That's a really good example of how it's important to try to rule out, well, what could be causing this? What could be happening? And then too is that what I have learned is that, particularly for people who have pre-existing respiratory conditions, is that once they have it, they have it, but then circumstances may actually elevate their symptomology. And I've seen that repeatedly in several cases I've worked with, is that while they've been managing their situation, then there's an exposure, not necessarily planned or whatever, or something happened like COVID, and now they've become more sensitive. And then something else has happened and then become more sensitive. So they never go back to the level that they were. And so that's another thing that it can, an pre-existing condition can become progressive.
And an example of that, this is not a workers' comp claim, but it was a very interesting non-industrial request for an accommodation. We have a high school who has a teacher who's allergic to latex. All types of latex cannot be, and I mean not even enter the classroom, any gloves, any balloons, anything. And so the district was like, how are we going to work with this? And so what it finally came down to, and this was not a work comp claim, her allergy to latex she has had for many years, and it just got worse, right? Over time, and being around balloons and around gloves, she developed such a heightened sensitivity. The doctor said, or none of them can be in the classroom at all. And so the district was really puzzled. How are we going to do it? So you know what they did? They put a sign up outside her classroom, no balloons in her classroom, sorry, for birthdays and other fun events, and no latex gloves. And there were certain items, no latex was allowed in the classroom. Now, the school district did not say the greater campus. They told her, you need to stay out of other areas because we can control your classroom. We're not going to make the whole campus latex free. That's not a reasonable accommodation, and we can't even do it. And so they said, if you're walking around and you see balloons, you need to kind of go the other way. It's sort of on you. And she had to stay out of certain areas because the nurse's station had latex gloves. There were certain areas where there were balloons and parties present. She couldn't go there, but her room, they were able to accommodate her restriction.
Yeah, and that's a great point because again, as I oftentimes will say, we focus on the individual performing his or her own job in her work environment or his or her work environment. But as soon as we start going outside of that immediate area, Now we're starting to impact the well-being and livelihood of other people. And so, again, trying to narrow out the sources, but then also narrow down the impact. And so, thanks for those great examples. And I'd like to just share that, some of my experiences in this last year or so around workplace sensitivities have included things like mold. And so I'll just share with everybody that portable classrooms, portable office buildings are prone to mold issues. And so not a conducive work environment for somebody who has mold issues. And that can be problematic because if an entire department is housed in one of those things, and that's where everyone comes, that kind of cases. So we're going on to reevaluate for next year. Because they've done all kinds of testing. And that's the other thing is testing is very important, again, to try to rule it out. But there are some kinds of like molds, for example, that may not be picked up on the usual tests. And that's why it's important that the employee do their part in evaluating, their allergies, et cetera, and for their doctors to provide more information, because otherwise it could be a never-ending guessing game about what could be causing this. The other thing that has been emerging of late, it's been going on for a while, but fragrance-free work environments. And so again, an employer can't require, a totally fragrance-free, but we can, like in your situation, Felicia, we can make areas fragrance-free. And, and there are sample verbiage statements that can be put in, sample policies. And believe me, I've researched this from the Job Accommodation Network, from Cal OSHA, from the Centers for Disease Control, the American Lung Association. And so, it is, again, an increasing problem. And I have one situation of where employees known about her issue for a long time. She's actually worked for the employer for 9 years. But again, some things have happened, and new coworker who wasn't so sensitive to her needs persisted in using scented sanitizers and scented lotions, and even candles in the workplace to try to cover up odors that were coming in from children, soiled and things like that. So, so we're working through that, but yeah, and some other things, but it may be necessary to relocate the employee, like what you've seen in your situation. Yeah. So again, this sort of ties into number 4. It's real important not to say, well, nobody else has the issue. Why is it, why do you have a problem? Well, the reality is that we all have our uniquenesses. And so again, be mindful of attitude and not just ruling things out and just say, well, tell us more, help us understand what you perceive to be the triggers for your respiratory. Are you under medical care? Have you been doing testing? Let's explore this. And again, that's where the interactive process comes in, to have that kind of conversation.
That definitely came up with the building remodel, because there were 100 people that worked in that building, but there were 5 people that said that building was brand newly remodeled. And when you remodel, you've painted, you've recarpeted, there are a lot of things that are done. And it could be those people were just very sensitive. They also worked closely together and all talked to each other. So I told them sometimes there's a psychosocial aspect to this as well, but you still have to address their concerns, because otherwise it's going to turn into a much bigger problem. And when they temporarily moved them, they hadn't even gone to the doctor yet. Right? They did that preemptively to say, look, you know what? We are listening to your concerns. We are having M&O and loss control come in and look at, they didn't dismiss them.
Yeah.
Right?
Very
They
important.
did not dismiss them.
Yeah. And one thing I would like to just add, because when we talk about air situations, it's important to have M&O come take a look at the ventilation systems and in the shared duct systems, because sometimes we overlook cleaning them out periodically. And so there's a lot of dust and dirt that accumulate there, possibly mold. And even in new construction, I have been heard of situations of where they do new construction, but then behind the scenes they didn't clean up, and there's stuff still in the ventilation systems. And so it's sort of like a shakedown process. And so yeah, be proactive, be empathetic. Could be you, and things do develop. Yep, great. Okay, so let's move on to number 2. When doctors disagree, who's right and who's wrong? And I know we've touched on this issue before, Felicia, in terms of the hierarchy in workers' comp, but then what we take a look at in the overall ADA FEHA picture. And
And I
so
think,
what's your
yeah.
experience there?
Well, I think I had such an interesting, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of schools about this particular issue. And the last time, or the most recent one that came up, was we had a custodian who had seen an orthopedist who had given him quite a few work restrictions. No heavy lifting work restrictions, no prolonged standing and bending or stooping. So, work restrictions, and custodial is a fairly heavy job. And so they were trying to figure out how they were going to accommodate those. And this person was also running through the end of their particular district's, which I believe is 120 days total of temporary modified or temporary accommodated duty, and they knew it. And so lo and behold, right before the end of the temporary accommodated duty period ran out, they show up and they have what? A full release from a primary treating physician, not the orthopedist. And the district said, this is not medically appropriate. Is this medical malpractice? So I thought, that's very interesting. I've never heard it posed to me this way. We have lots of different doctors seeing people in the workers' comp system, but also anybody who treats in group health, you could have a lot of doctors too, right? I just think about a COVID claim that we have right now that's long COVID. They're treating with a pulmonologist. They have a physical therapist that they're seeing. They have their primary care doctor, right? Their primary treating doctor. And then they're also seeing, can't remember, I want to say it's a cardiologist or somebody to deal with the heart, right? Because these are the parts of your body that long COVID is really, they have got like 5 different doctors. What should be happening in workers' comp, and this is what I explained to the person that was asking me about, is this medical malpractice? I said, not all doctors agree. That just is a fact from doing workers' comp for as long as I have. And if you have, when we go to the IPM and look at the ADA process and what we're doing, we're not actually like looking at the doctors in a hierarchy. We do a very odd thing in workers' comp. We do this odd thing where primary treaters, who see you the most, by the way, they're the person that sees you like every visit, and physical therapists really see you a lot because they see you 2 or 3 times a week. And chiros, same thing. Your chiropractor is going to see you a couple times a week. And so is your acupuncturist, by the way. They're going to see you a couple, 2 to 3 times a week. Orthopedists will see you what? Once every 6 to 8 weeks, if that, maybe 3 months. And then if you get like a specialist, like a pulmonologist, they're going to see you like, very rarely. So but it is interesting in workers' comp, who has the highest in our world? QMEs, who see you one time only in your whole life of your claim, or AMEs, who see you one time only in the whole life of your claim, maybe another time for a follow-up, to do something, but your major eval is done once. And we hierarchy that out over a primary treater, a chiro, or an acupuncturist who are seeing you lots, right? They have a really good idea of how you are. Once we get into the IPM process, all of that hierarchy ends and everybody's down on the table. And so this district asked me, is the ortho more credible than the primary treater, who happens to be an ACMED in this case, but it could be a chiro's primary treater? Who's more credible? And I said, you guys, so that's not the way you do it in the ADA, right? It's not like that.
Yeah, it presents some very interesting dichotomies and trying to figure that out. And again, we all have seen where somebody's been out of work and limitations and unable to come back in their usual job. Maybe they're doing temporary duty, and then we have the IPM, and okay, here's where we are. Cannot accommodate these limitations. Blah blah blah. You don't have transferable skills, and this is what here's 100 days, or here's the ed code. And on your way. Oh, all of a sudden, full release to duty.
I'm healed.
Yeah, I'm healed. And so it's like, and that's another aspect then of malpractice, is that, well, okay, are we using objective medical information here and evaluating someone's condition, or how influenced are these doctors by their employees? And I'm dealing with a situation right now where three injuries over the last 4 years, different body parts, released and returned to work without limitations, but the employee kept reporting pain, but no further treatment. And then, so 2 of them were in 2020. And then one of the last the last one that included 3 body parts was in 2023. And she's let's just say, well, custodian, okay? And so she was placed in light custodial fairly quickly after her May 2023 injury. So really no lost time, hadn't used her 60 days of industrial leave. And so she's been fulfilling needs and working. Now, so we've met, and again, it's really unclear, is she MMI or not? She's got 3 different occupational medical facilities involved, 3 different doctors involved for different medical, different body parts. And so it's like, where are you? And I just did actually a very detailed summary yesterday to sort of get a handle. Where are we on this? And what's going to happen. And so I have real concerns. Her functional limitations don't so much limit her, but she still has moderate to high pain levels that are not being addressed anywhere. And so we know that when people are working with pain, we're not as focused. Right. And then also we could be exacerbating those body parts. And so let's just say we have a conference call tomorrow afternoon on that one. But it's again, who takes precedence and who's really calling the shots here.
And it's funny, they always ask me, what is your process when you go through the IPM, and let's say you have 3 notes. In some cases, like you're talking about this one with 4 injuries, there could be 4 notes, and the notes aren't all the same. Some of them have work restrictions, but they're not all the same. And some of them are full releases and some are not. And I said, we have to resolve the conflict. And they were like, well, how? How do you resolve a conflict? I said, you look at all the notes, you look at what's the most recent note, you look at the notes that sort of match and aligned more together. You look at the notes that sort of match the symptoms and what's going on when in the discussion with the IPM. And then sometimes they get a fit for duty outside the work comp system to break the tie, because sometimes, not always, but sometimes that's decided as a way that could help.
Yeah. And I would, my encouragement is, rather than, we as a team making subjective decisions, supposedly on objective information, but ultimately, we're trying to make sense of all of this. I do encourage employers to consider a fitness for duty, because from my rationale, then it's like, okay, we've got these multiple medical conditions or multiple medical reports, or a rapid change in condition from full release to 2 months ago, 3 months ago, they were very limited. And that, because I have had the situation of where the employee ultimately was released to full duty, as was the last doctor's report. But as I've said, at least it's not on you. It's now the medical provider who's released them, and not the employer who's arbitrarily made a decision to go ahead and return the employee to work when we've had this history of mixed reports. And so to me, it's a place of protecting your liability, shall we say, should there be something down the road. Right. Well, you sent the person to a qualified doctor who evaluated everything, and they released them. So we did what we were medically guided to do.
And I think what fit for duty physicians don't have, because they're not working in the work comp system, they're outside. Work comp physicians, obviously, work comp physicians want to release people to return to work, right? That's we beat that into them, right? That we want our people to come back to work like duty. We've got work for them. We're shorthanded in some departments. We like our people to come back to work. So that's their mantra, sort of what they want to do. And I also think doctors will only treat and comment just on the injury that they're treating. So if somebody else is treating a different injury, sometimes your notes aren't all for the same injury, because to your point, one employee could have 3 or 4 different claims with different body parts.
Absolutely. So it's still a conundrum, but it'll be interesting to see medical malpractice. We are seeing some things happen in other arenas. Maybe that will extend here. Who knows? So, okay, on to service dogs. Boy, this hasn't been an area of big change. service dogs have been around for a long time, particularly for the visually impaired and other kinds of more evident physical disabilities. But it really sort of grew in emergence as well in working with veterans who had a variety of traumatic injuries. And so service dogs started being trained in a different kind of way. And that's been going on for quite a while. And then, and then we started to find, emotional support dogs. And so people who did deal with anxiety or depression and things like that. And so they can be hugely beneficial. I mean, I think we can all appreciate the value of a dog settling up and how warm and, calming that can be. And so then, some guidelines around, the presence of support dogs started to change. And this is another area like with the respiratory conditions, there are all kinds of agencies you can tap into. And whether it's the Job Accommodation Network, whether it's the Civil Rights Commission in California, and et cetera. And so, particularly on the airlines, they really did start cracking down on what constitutes a support dog. We were seeing all kinds of things come up on the airplanes. But now workplaces have changed too. And so for quite a long time, support animals were allowed in the workplace to some degree, provided there was a medical note. And the whole idea of support dogs really sort of took hold when it came to residential issues, people who were renting apartments and had benefit from a support animal, but then it expanded into the workplace. And now what we've experienced, and certainly here in San Diego County too, is that, okay, more animals in the workplace. Well, now we have other people's allergies. We have the potential of dog bites. We have, the potential of, students being traumatized because of their fear of dogs, for example. And so what we've seen is a restriction again is like, well, what's doable? The Ed Code does provide for service dogs, and pretty clear. And I'll send out the language for that. But it does, provide for service dogs to support medical needs. That also says the dog has to be trained to specifically support the employee in performing the essential functions of their job. And so this is where I really encountered a lot of dilemma. It's like, okay, we hear your request for a service dog, but how does a service dog actually help you perform the essential functions of your job? And has the animal been trained? Because again, sort of like the fitness for duty, well, let me explain a little bit. And I know we have a question in the chat box on the last one, so I'll come back to that. So thanks for the question, Beatrice. And so the thing is that policies can require that you have training for your dog. The Job Accommodation Network actually says you can't really require it. It's actually an exception to the policy of no dogs in the workplace. And again, if there's a medical condition, you really have to evaluate, again, what are the implications? How are others impacted by it? And again, how does the dog specifically meet an individual's needs? And so after a very prolonged and protracted couple of cases that I've been working on and off for the last couple of years, this is where I was going to, like with FFDs, fitness for duties can help sort of protect your liability, that if somebody else is properly evaluated from a medical background, then that sort of protects your liability, that if the person still gets hurt again, there still may be a workers' comp claim, but again, you've done your due diligence that you just haven't put somebody back. And so with these policies and then the different guidelines is that I strongly recommend that you look at, including in your policy, that dogs do have proper training and that they also have proper training in servicing the employee's medical condition. Because there are lots of other issues in terms of liability about, dogs in the workplace. And so again, if you can prove that your dog's been trained to meet the needs of the person and the dog should not be approached as a pet, there's certain conditions around service dogs, then again, you're addressing the employee's medical accommodation request, but you're also protecting your greater population in ways that place them at less risk if you know a dog's been trained. So that's been my conclusion, and I'm standing by it. So
yeah, we have seen a few, not many, work comp claims where a service dog that's been allowed on campus has bitten an employee. So
Mhm.
that certainly would be covered. That would be certainly covered on campus. And then we have seen on the property and liability side where students have been bit. I think we have 2 of them in the face by service dogs. So, and those were accepted and picked up because that's always kind of like, is it covered over on the property and liability? On workers' comp, it is covered. If it's on campus and you allowed the dog onto campus, then it brings it into AOE COE, right? You were doing your duties and dog came up and bit you. I think on the student side, it's a little bit more gray, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Who's
And I know,
responsible if that dog bites a child?
right, right. And I know for a while there was attempts to, okay, employee, if you want a service dog in the workplace, then you provide your liability and coverage for the animal to be with you at work. And it sounds like a great idea. That would mitigate the risk for the the employer. Um, and yet what we found with employees who attempted to go that direction is that their homeowners insurance would not cover them. To bring a dog into the workplace, it's like, well, if you won't cover them, why should we cover them? And so it really became quite a conundrum. And so that's where, with lots of research and again, comparison to different kinds of things, I deduced that, really training would be the way to go and proper documentation. You just don't bring a dog in. There's steps that you need to go through. And so if you are presented with that, give me a call because I've certainly been through that and can give you some
Yes, you
directions
become an
on what to do.
expert on service dogs,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
Because
yeah,
we've had quite a few. These are non-industrial, of course, requests for accommodation, but we've had quite a few of them.
yeah, yeah,
Over.
yeah. Yeah, and so I'm going to go back to Beatrice's question here. It goes back to our
It's a
second
great
topic.
question.
Yeah, in this example of the discrepancy of the QME and treating physicians' determination of work restrictions versus full duty, the employee should be allowed to return to work while options are being considered, correct? Well, I have my thoughts, but what about you, Felicia?
So I've seen it handled 3 different ways.
Okay.
So it depends on the district and their policies, but I had one district that had this happen, and after they got the full release to return to work note, even though they didn't have clarity and there was a conflict, while they were scheduling the IPM, they are paying paid administrative leave because they're not bringing them back to work with the full duty note. So that's one example. Most districts don't do that, but that's what this district decided to do. And they talked with their advisory council too before, because this is on the employment law side, right? This is nothing to do with comp. Even though it arises from a workers' comp claim, the bringing them back to work and employment and all of that is on the employment law side. What most districts do is they stay off and go through sick leave or whatever leave bank that they have available while an IPM is held because there's a conflict until the conflict gets resolved. And then I have seen some districts bring them back to work and follow the most recent return to work note, bring them back to work, and then have the IPM to provide clarity. That doesn't happen very often either. Most people do we wait and you stay off until we get clarity because we don't have one clear return to work decision.
Right, right. Yeah, and I would agree. I've seen all 3 of those things too. So Beatrice, to the answer to your question, there's no one right way. Okay.
I don't know how helpful that was.
Yeah, no, but there are options to consider. I would say the best practices though is that to remove the employee from work while the evaluation is being conducted. And there's a couple of reasons for that. Not just the employee's safety, but it also gets into the psychological perception of the employee. I've seen a lot of situations over the years where employees just keeps working and that, they get accustomed that this is the way life will be and no big problem. And pretty soon, it just gets out of hand. And so to be consistent with process and protocol and procedure, I do advocate that people be taken off of work until the issue is resolved so that the employee knows that this isn't no light matter here. This is important stuff. And in that, and they're responsible for contributing to getting clarity too. And so it sort of helps put them into a different psychological framework, shall we say, about their return to work options and actually helps motivate them to get back to work. more efficiently and effectively. So
Can I
yeah.
ask a question?
Yes, go ahead, Beatrice.
Okay.
Yeah.
So in this particular case, this employee's been working the whole time. They've been accommodated for a
Mhm.
long time. And they went to a QME in October. The QME gave permanent work restrictions.
Mhm.
They've been treated. They've continued treating with the treating physician. They had some additional treatment that hadn't previously been offered. And now the treating physician has released them back to full duty.
Mhm.
This is now in March. So we're talking 5 months go by. There's
Mhm.
some new treatment.
Mhm.
Does it sound a little miraculous? Yes. Right. I mean, there's that. But the bottom line is they've released them. This has been the treating physician accepted by the carrier, this whole time. And they're not being allowed, or the question was, should they be allowed to go back to work while this is being worked out? Because the decision was to go back to the QME to ask for clarification, to review, but this employee doesn't have any leaves. So
Well, and that will take a long time.
exactly.
It takes 2 to 3 months to get a QME eval, and then it
Mhm.
takes 2 months to get the
Yes,
QME report. That's 4
exactly.
months.
So what I'm saying is
Usually
you
an
shouldn't,
IPM
right,
is scheduled as soon as possible to
right.
try
But
to
what is
resolve.
the IPM going to do? The IPM is not going to get any clarity between the discrepancy, right, between the two doctors. This employee wants to be at work,
Mhm.
but if the district is saying, they don't want to take on the liability, in my opinion, we're opening ourselves up for more liability by hindering the employee from returning to work or not earning money, right? Because we're not paying them paid admin leave. And
Mhm.
there are no leaves to access at this point. So that was, I guess, my question is, that's
Okay.
where you open the door up to FEHA if you
Mhm.
are hindering an employee from returning to work in whatever capacity.
Mhm.
And so I just wanted to get, given both of your years of experience in some of this, I just wanted to get a different opinion. Because like I said, in my opinion, I think the employee either should be returned to work in some sort of modified capacity, going with the stricter of the two, right? Full duty versus not, while we consider the options, given that there aren't any other leaves to access or paid admin leave. I mean,
Was an IPM held after the October permanent work restrictions and a decision made whether
it was held in February. Yes. It was held in
permanently
February
accommodate?
that we were going to go into permanent work restrictions, and that it would be very likely that they would not be able to be accommodated.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Yeah, because I had a couple of questions about that, because you talked about, they've been accommodated for a long time. And so I think it's important to distinguish about so-called temporary accommodations, while someone is still not MMI, or had there actually been a long-term accommodation made and it was considered safe for the employee to continue working,
Correct.
but with accommodation.
Right.
If it was the latter, and now the employee is being released to full duty, I would have less of a question, because if the person's already reached MMI, they have long-term limitations that can be accommodated, and now they're full duty. It's sort of like, okay, great, okay, you can go back to full duty. But so on the other hand, if somebody's been temporarily accommodated for a long time, where's your policy about 120 days for one? Because I would normally recommend that at 120 days, somebody is taken off of work if their limitations haven't improved enough, or if they haven't reached MMI yet. And so it sounds like in this situation, that there was a long-term accommodation. I guess, I would go back to the IPM, and it may not resolve things, but it may get clarity in terms of, because I have had several situations of where employees, after seeing the QME, for example, did get further treatment, did make really good improvement. They sort of said, I got to get back on top of this, because otherwise I'm going to be out of a job if I go by that doctor. So I've seen that a lot, where people have truly improved. And so I guess a couple of things, I want to discourage people from trying to go to the route of the QME to seek clarification.
Yeah.
Unnecessarily prolong things for
Mhm.
going
And they're
on.
not good at resolving these things. This is not what
No.
Right.
it's not what
Yeah.
their expertise is.
Right.
Yeah. And so again, what other options? But again, if you know, by doing an IPM and saying, okay, here's the dilemma we face. We got this and we got this, you know, and help us understand where are you, you know, in your recovery and what have you done or what else have you done to contribute to your perceived improvement. And then what other resources do you have to get clarification? So yeah, that's a difficult situation, Beatrice, but I
Mhm.
guess starting
Very
off with
interesting
the
case.
short-term, long-term, and then you know, encourage you not to go the QME route to get clarification because that will
Yeah.
take forever.
Mhm.
No, okay, thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, yeah. Well, and that sort of leads right in perfect segue into our last point, then my way or the highway, or thinking outside the box. And so, you know, again, the purpose. I guess I find it interesting. The ADA has been around since 1990, and I find it interesting how employers in general, not just school districts, but maybe resistant to doing an IP, an interactive process. And it's like, wow, I mean, that's exactly, it's a form of mediation. It's a very niche part of that, but it's a come together to engage and to interact and to exchange information and come up collaboratively with a plan of action of what next to do. And that kind of approach is what the EEOC expects. And so when you don't do that, you know, there are consequences for failing to engage. And there are also consequences for taking a very arbitrary my way or the highway approach. Would you agree, Felicia?
Oh, yes, right. Flexibility is important in this process and keeping an open mind.
Yeah, yeah, because we've seen decisions of where, you know, the employer may have done certain things, but then, you know, they didn't do other things, and that's where the EOC still ding them for not doing a thorough enough job. And then on the other hand, we've seen cases of where employers have really gone above and beyond, and really
Yes.
explored and actively, well, like the examples you gave earlier too, is even before any medical, take them out of the area, remove them from harm's way, you know, and be proactive about that.
Right. We care about you. We want to
Mhm.
try to do our best, you know, with what we can do. And I found a couple of interesting examples for this topic. The first one involves Drexel University. This was an employee who was a vice president at Drexel University in Philadelphia who filed a lawsuit that her manager violated the ADA and failed to accommodate her PTSD anxiety condition. Her manager met with her regularly. They had one-to-ones. This was something they did every week. So this was a regular thing. She told her abruptly, in lieu of their regular one-to-one, she had to do a Zoom meeting with a junior staff member that she doesn't normally meet with. And because of this PTSD anxiety condition, this really set her off. And she needed to talk to her manager about there was a situ with a student that was disciplined, and they were going to discuss how that was done. And you know what happened? She didn't explain to her why they weren't doing the one-to-one. She just said, you're doing a Zoom meeting with this junior staff member that you don't know. The employee got on the Zoom meeting and again expressed discomfort that she didn't feel comfortable with the Zoom meeting. She'd like to have a one-to-one and to meet with her manager alone first. The manager refused. And she said, despite knowing that she had stress and anxiety and other disabilities, so even she kept expressing this, and in the Zoom meeting, she said, I'm just not comfortable with this format for discussing she had disciplined or handled a student complaint in a way that they wanted to talk about. And afterwards, the manager then accused her of insubordination, and she was placed on admin leave. So there were all kinds of problems there, right? And a complete failure to listen, or and why not do the one-to-one, right? And why pass her off to somebody else that she doesn't normally work with? And why insist that it be on Zoom, which sometimes for difficult personal conversations, one-on-one is not the best format, right? But there was no flexibility. And so a lawsuit on that case has been filed, and that's an ADA case that's up right now. The other case, the judge used this case as an example about why the ADA exists. That's how the case starts.
Okay.
This is a case in Indiana, and the judge said all the managers at this company needed to be trained on how to deal with disability related absences because they differ from regular absences from people that are, out on vacation or out sick. So here and there. So this is a U.S. District Court in Indiana. They granted a summary judgment to EEOC in a lawsuit filed against Keystone company. They wrongfully terminated an employee with a disability for missing too much work in order to seek medical care. And EEOC said the company violated the ADA for not providing a reasonable accommodation to a painter who had a rare medical condition that caused large, painful kidney stones to develop that needed surgery for removal. And any of us that have known anyone that's had a kidney stone, it was really painful. The judge said that the ADA prohibited the employer from discriminating on any aspect of employment and required the employer, they should have provided some type of reason or discussed a reasonable accommodation. They did not meet with the employee to determine how much time off he needed to return to work. The judge said the managers needed to be trained to understand how these absences differ, and the case should have been referred to HR before any termination discussion took place. What the judge was saying is that companies don't need to take an employee's word for their disability, but that they can require a note from a doctor. But he brought in a note, right, about his condition and just said, I need some time off to go to the doctor when I'm in a lot of pain for this condition. And they were just like not having it. And they said, we're not going to talk about it. We're not, not even recognizing that this was a request for an accommodation, right? Because those words he did not use. He didn't use those words.
Yeah.
So, but it was interesting because when the judge started, he said, this case illustrates why the ADA exists at all, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I'm glad you brought that example up because again, that used to be the case for a long time as employers said, well, the employee didn't say they needed an accommodation. Well,
Right.
they told you they have a medical condition that's impacting them, and so, and how do employees know what accommodations they need? Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And so this is where, you as the employer are the bigger person, the bigger entity, and particularly being in HR, your role and responsibility is to know these things and to be attuned to when employees bring up issues about how they're impacted in anything medical, automatically kicks off the ADA. And then this is where it's real important too, going back to part of our earlier conversation, is that the ADA does permit you to, request medical documentation and to also provide medical documentation from an appropriate provider who's qualified and skilled in the medical condition that the employee is reporting. So you can't have a chiropractor responding to a heart condition, or, a cardiologist responding to an orthopedic condition. You do need to have somebody that's appropriately qualified.
And it was interesting because in that last case, he was disciplined just like somebody who has an absenteeism problem, not met with on an interactive process meeting to discuss someone who had a disability, right?
Yeah, right. And then that's where it's also important to, is this short-term or is this long-term, and I'm working with the case too, where the employee's had two conditions since all of his adult life, but for reasons not entirely clear, he's had a lot of increase in symptomology the last 5 years. And not to say there weren't problems before, but now it's become very problematic in performance as well as attendance. And so we're going to be meeting in a couple of weeks to develop a trial plan that addresses the performance issues. How can the accommodation process be used to bring up his performance? I say this a lot in my openings, but I don't encounter a lot of where we're actually having to look at accommodations to help bring back up the employee's performance to the level expected, because right now the performance is impacted by the medical condition. And then also how do we improve attendance? And it's a management level position, so his presence and access to him is very important. Yeah. So a lot of different examples continue to exist, and I hope that all of you, enjoy the conversations and discussions that we have about actual cases that happen before the EEOC, as well as real life examples. And again, I feel like I have truly become experts in a couple of areas that wasn't so expert in a few years ago. But this is where things continue to evolve and our thinking evolves, and therefore our attitudes need to evolve. And I always like to say, keep in mind, this could be you with a medical condition that impacts your ability to be at work, stay at work,
Right.
perform work. So let's be resources to each other and support each other as we move forward in helping the employees that serve our students. So great. Well, thank you so much, Felicia, again, for your time. Thank you, Marlene, for your comments. And when we send out the notes, I will provide some of the resources I have about the dogs and the service dogs and the respiratory. And again, a recording will be coming out. And don't hesitate to reach out with questions that you might have, okay? And do pass and share, the recordings, share it with your team. Make everybody more informed and think about what a better workplace our worlds would be. Thank you again, everyone. Take care.
Wonderful to see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Felicia.